Comprehensible input, or listening to a language at a level you can mostly follow, is the fastest, most efficient way to develop your understanding of a language.
But comprehensible input is slow. Why would I sit around waiting to randomly see a word appear in input, hoping to bump into it enough times to piece together what it means? With a flashcard deck, I don't have to wait for anything. If I want 50 new words tonight, I get 50 new words tonight. As many as I want, as fast as I want. And I don't just vaguely recognize them when they drift past me. I can produce them, I can use them, I can pull them out on command. Next to that, sitting and watching a video that might only show me a few new words a minute feels painfully inefficient.
How could anyone disagree with this? The argument is airtight. It's simply true. Flashcards allow you to recall more words more quickly than input. The problem with this is that recall actually says very little about how well you understand a language. To truly understand a language, it's not about how many words you can recall or how fast you can recall them. Language learning fundamentally is about recognition. When you see your mother's face, do you look at her, study her features, and then consciously recall who she is? Or do you immediately know who she is before you even have time to think? Your brain recognizes your mother before you've even realized it's happened. Recognition, unlike recall, has no conscious thinking step required. It's fully a product of unconscious pattern recognition. The reality is, you don't know how you recognize the face of your mother. You don't need to study her eyes. You don't need to focus on her nose. You don't have to measure her forehead. Your brain just knows. That's mom. Recognition is a product of deep understanding. Recall doesn't necessarily have any relationship to understanding. Recall is simply the process of taking something you've already heard and pulling it into your conscious mind. No new information is necessarily added by that step. You can become extremely good at recalling the description of something without ever building an intuitive, deep understanding of that thing itself. Imagine I asked you to describe the taste of Frosted Flakes, and you said this: Frosted Flakes are a delicious breakfast cereal made from toasted corn flakes coated in a sweet frosting. They provide a crunchy texture and a satisfyingly sweet taste the whole family can enjoy. It doesn't sound like you've tried Frosted Flakes. It sounds like you've gotten really good at recalling what's on the box. So let's reread the title of this video: the fastest, most efficient way to understand a language. Comprehensible input is not the fastest way to recite or recall pieces of the language. But recitation, again, is just not representative of a deep, durable understanding. We have to be really careful thinking we deeply understand a language simply because we can translate it or recall it or recite it. I'm gonna say this again: a deep, durable understanding is a product of unconscious recognition. So let's talk about how our brains build that kind of deep, durable understanding. They build it through association. What we're doing when we're learning a language is not building our ability to quickly recall the definitions of words. We're building associations between words and other words and concepts. And we don't need to know what these associations actually are. Our brain just makes them implicitly as we read or listen to the language at a level we understand. And these associations are the bedrock of our understanding of a language. They're responsible for deep implicit understanding of words. They're responsible for unconscious real-time comprehension. They're responsible for natural, authentic production of the language. And they're responsible for lasting durability. But before we get into how associations actually do that, I'm going to answer the question of how associations even get built in the first place. Associations are something that our brain just naturally creates. When you hear birds chirping, you think morning. When you hear thunder, you think lightning. When you hear a Slack notification, you think work. You didn't have to study the relationship between those sounds and what they represent. Your brain just silently stored that context every time you heard them. Associations don't require a recall step. They're simply a result of our brain's natural tendency to look for patterns. We don't actually need to know that we've been making these associations for our brain to have them. So let's take the first thing that I said associations are responsible for: a deep implicit understanding of words. Most people think that a word is just a label tied to one or more concepts. So if you want to learn a word, the task feels simple. Learn the label, learn the concepts the label points to, and then practice connecting those concepts back to the label until the connection feels fast. But if we look at how we actually understand words as native speakers, that model simply doesn't make sense. There's a famous thought experiment that asks native speakers to rank birds based on how good of an example they are of a bird. And if you do this thought experiment, you start to see an emergent collective ranking effect. Most native speakers will rank a robin as the ideal example of a bird, and they'll rate a penguin as the worst example of a bird. This doesn't really make sense if the word bird is just a label pointing to a handful of animals on the planet. It's indicative instead that our understanding of the word bird is actually a core set of features built from association. Every time we heard the word bird, our brain silently recorded what birds looked like, what they did, where they lived, how they behaved. The core features of a bird became flight, feathers, small bodies, trees, nests. A robin activates almost all of those core associations. It flies, it builds nests in trees, it's small, it has all the associations we most often connected to the word when we heard it. A penguin, on the other hand, has much less of those core features. It doesn't fly, it swims. It doesn't live in trees, it lives on ice. And it doesn't look much like the birds we usually encounter. In other words, even a word as simple as bird isn't really just a label pointing to a group of species in our head. It's stored as a web of associations. And you could imagine how this is doubly true for more abstract concepts like love and sacrifice. If we believe we've mastered a word because we can recall it fast, we completely disregard the way we understand words as native speakers. The Robin experiment shows that what we call knowing a word is really the accumulation of thousands of associations, not the memorization of a definition. So that's how associations construct deep implicit understanding, but associations are actually responsible for something arguably even more important, and that's real-time comprehension. How do we get real-time comprehension in a second language like we have in our native language, where someone just talks to us and without any conscious thought we understand exactly what they're saying? A lot of people imagine second language comprehension as that same recall process. You hear a word, retrieve its meaning, hear the next word, retrieve its meaning, so on and so forth, and you construct the meaning of a sentence based on all the pieces you've heard. But that simply isn't what it feels like to understand your native language. When someone starts a sentence, your brain is already predicting where they're going before they even get close to finishing. And what makes that possible? Again, associations. When you hear the word peanut butter when someone's speaking, your brain doesn't just hand you the concept of peanut butter. It automatically primes you to hear all the concepts that peanut butter has ever been associated with. So when you hear a sentence like, "She made a peanut butter and blank sandwich," you have a very strong idea about what the missing word is. Your brain didn't search through a mental dictionary to fill in the blank. It used the surrounding context to recognize what was most likely coming next. Real-time comprehension isn't a sequence of tiny recall events. It's your brain using context to continuously predict and recognize meaning as language unfolds. When we hear a word in context, our unconscious mind doesn't just invoke the idea of that one word. Instead, it invokes a network of ideas that surround it. Every other word that the original word has been associated with gets primed for us in order of strongest association to weakest association, because our brain has been conditioned to expect certain words to follow. And there's a crucial detail here. It's not just the words that cause this activation. It's the situation around the word. When you knock on someone's front door and they answer it and smile, your brain has already activated greeting. Right when you see someone smile, you expect, "Hello, welcome, come in." The facial expression itself is helping you predict the language. And this idea of words activating other words doesn't just explain real-time comprehension, it also explains fluent speech. Whenever you're speaking the language yourself, your brain is priming whole sets of words for you, using that same network of associations. Think about this. If I asked you what letter comes after R in the alphabet, do you just know that, or do you first have to sing the alphabet in your head to get that information? Or for example, you might not know the words to a song you used to really enjoy, but then when that song comes on, it's almost like your brain unlocks a compartment of your memory and suddenly you can sing the song perfectly. That's because of activation through association. Fluent speech works the same way. Once you start a sentence, the words you've already said are silently activating the words that are likely to come next. Speech activates relevant concepts, and instead of you needing to consciously search for every word, instead you ride this wave of activation that's only made possible because of your network of associations. And this leads to the final and arguably most important function of associations: lasting durability of fluency. Most of us who want to become fluent in a language, we don't want to just be fluent for 1 month. We want to be fluent for, ideally, our entire lives. With a robust network of association supporting your understanding of a language, you don't forget how to recognize words, or at least not very easily. Because the same system that allows you to make implicit predictions and speak fluently also acts as a bulwark against forgetting. If every word you hear has the potential to activate many other words, then every encounter with the language is reinforcing far more than just the words you happen to hear. Every time you hear restaurant, you're not just activating restaurant. You're also activating menus, ordering, food, waiters, etc. If we want to visualize this, let's look at the word menu. If you've just learned this word by looking at a picture of it on a flashcard and throwing it into a few sentences to see its use cases, then you've made a handful of associations. But if you've heard it in tons of authentic situations, you haven't just associated it with a handful of other words and an image. Instead, you've associated it with thousands of other words and concepts. And if we imagine what it means to forget a word, we might imagine some of these associations being cut off because they don't get activated. Well, for the word with tons of associations, that doesn't matter much, the same way a spider web won't fall just because you cut one string of its web. A word with 1,000 associations doesn't become forgotten because you lose a handful of associations. But if you lose an association here, you might be in serious trouble of forgetting. And that's why flashcard users require spaced repetition, because they realize on some level intuitively that they're only renting the word. They don't really have a foundation underneath it. So they're constantly terrified that if they don't activate it, they're going to lose it. If you notice, those who learn words through input, we generally don't behave this way. We don't behave like the entire breadth of our language knowledge is just going to disappear if we don't do some recitation. We're not constantly worried about losing words because to us, a word isn't some atomic definition that's just floating around in the substrate of our mind. Instead, it's a dense collection of associations that's woven deeply into the fabric of our understanding of the language. It doesn't necessarily depend on us recalling it. It doesn't necessarily depend on us reciting it. It simply exists because it's so deeply woven into how we think. So when we look at how languages work under the hood, we see that the main driver of everything is associations. Associations between words and concepts, and associations between words and other words. So what does this tell us about how to learn a language efficiently? Well, it says the best way to learn a language is to make the highest number of associations as fast as possible. And this is why comprehensible input is unequivocally the fastest and most efficient way to learn a language. Listening to the language at a level you understand is like blasting yourself in the face with a fire hose of implicit information. Every word we meet in comprehensible input sits inside an authentic situation. It fits into a narrative. It's spoken by a person. It's surrounded by thousands of other words and ideas. Comprehensible input isn't the method you grab when you're in Spain and you need to learn how to ask the waiter for a glass of water. It's not the method you reach for when you want to quickly impress native speakers with perfect grammatical constructions. It's not the right method to build your short-term performance. Comprehensible input is the method you grab when you want to make a long-term investment into a durable ability to understand a language the same way you understand your native language. I can promise you, as someone who's learned Spanish for 2.5 years, that your ability to speak the language will naturally wax and wane. It's primarily based on how often you've been speaking. You're going to lose it as quick as it comes back. You don't want to base your competency in a language based on how fast your recall speed is, or how many words and phrases you can recite accurately. You want to base your competence on what your unconscious mind can effortlessly recognize, understand, and predict. That's the durable foundation on which all of your language competency will rest. It's the part that every other language skill depends on. Now, of course, as a final caveat for beginners, you should use flashcards if you like them. Do whatever you need to do to get to the point where you can comfortably access comprehensible input. For input to be effective, it's good to have 70% to 80% understanding of the message you're following. And if you're a beginner and you can't do that, you can't actually do comprehensible input effectively. Luckily, I just did a video with a tier list ranking the best methods for absolute beginners to get you to the point where you can understand input. I highly recommend you watch it. It's the practical application of all the theory in this video, and I will see you there.